Welcome to the STARS program, seniors taking active roles in society. And now, here's your host, ANITA FINLEY.
Right now, let's talk with Darwin. Good morning, Darwin.
Good morning to you, ANITA.
So, is the weather still okay up there?
The weather, the winds are blowing down from Canada. The summer has ended.
Well, how's it in your house? Are you? I know you're working on a new book.
Well, it's sweater time here, but we don't have a lot of time. But I really want to talk about something this morning. We've been hearing so much about age and health in this presidential campaign, and I want to prove to you that this is keeping your health records secret is a long American tradition. And, of course, as you know, Trump would, at 70 years old, would be the oldest man ever to seek the presidency. A lot of people say Reagan, but Reagan was 69. And Hillary, at 68, would be the third oldest person ever to seek the presidency. But computers have shown that, based on certain statistics, that Trump has a life expectancy of 14 years and 6 months, and Hillary has a life expectancy of 18 years and 3 months. Of course, Donald once told the press that when he looks in the mirror, he sees a 35-year-old man.
Don't we all? We all do, though. You know that, Darwin. We see you as a young kid, too.
Of course. But I want to go back in time a little bit. Let's begin with the first president, George Washington. He had a strong physique. He was 6'2". He was healthy for most of his life. He was in love all of his life with a beautiful Sally Fairfax, who was a neighbor next door and the wife of his best friend. But he married the short and portly Martha Washington. She was the richest woman in America. So our founding father was a bit of a gigolo, but outdoorsman, healthy. But then he came down with pneumonia. Now, his doctors were quacks. Over Martha's objection, they bled him 4 times, which really weakened his condition, and they poured all the molasses, vinegar, and butter, a combination drink, into him, and they filled him with so many laxatives that it totally weakened his system. And I hate to tell you, but our great first president died on the chamber pot. Okay.
Okay.
Moving on. John Adams, who you know, followed him in office, and his vice president was Thomas Jefferson. Well, the two men hated each other. Now, the system has changed. In those days, the one who got the second most votes became vice president. For example, if Hillary became president, then Donald Trump would be her vice president.
Oh, that's weird.
Of course, that changed long ago. And the men, Adams and Jefferson, opposed each other almost every issue. Adams abhorred slavery. Jefferson was a slave owner, and his concubine was a mulatto, Sally Hemings, but he was one of the most outspoken people against interracial relationships, oddly enough. And now the bizarre thing about how physicality came in this, he spread the rumor that John Adams was a hermaphrodite, and he wanted him to be examined by doctors, and then the results made public. He said, we need to know if our president is only half man, half woman. I mean, this sounds so bizarre, but it's true.
So what happened?
Adams refused.
Oh, of course.
And Jefferson lived to be 83, which was very old for life expectancy in those days, and he attributed his longevity to cold foot baths. Now, ironically, this will probably never happen again, Jefferson and Adams died on the same day, July 4th, 1826, which was the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Amazing that happened, a coincidence. Now, we will fast. Here was where age really came in for the first time. We fast forward now to 1841. William Henry Harrison, a member of the Whig Party, was the oldest person ever to run for president. He was 67 years old, and his enemies call him, get this, a living mass of ruined matter.
Oh, my heavens.
Very offensive to people of my age, let me tell you.
Yeah.
But when he gave his inaugural address, it was the longest address in history, 105 minutes. The day was windy, cold, and rainy, and he didn't wear a coat and hat. He came back to the White House, and he fell sick the next day, but he recovered. Then a few days later, he got these awful chills. Well, the doctors were really quacks, and they came in and started filling him with castor oil and giving him opium and having him drink a lot of brandy, and this led to colitis, vomiting, and hepatitis, and he died on April 4th, 1841. It was the shortest term of any presidency, and his vice president, then John Tyler, filled out the term, which was basically a full term. And things went on and on, like Franklin Pierce, who became president in 1853. He was an alcoholic. Had always been ever since he was a young man. And he had a lot of emotional troubles. Right before he became president, his son's head was crushed in a train accident, and his marriage fell apart. And he was really drunk for most of his presidency, and he died of stomach inflammation. Oh, my God.
Wait. Okay, wait. Let me ask you a question. Well, was he, during his presidency, did anything bad happen while he was drinking?
No.
Okay.
No.
So
Well, other than well, bad would be his wife leaving him.
No, I meant for the country.
No. Well, a time of turmoil, but not any. Thank God, no major disaster occurred.
Right.
It was a relatively peaceful time.
Okay.
Then Zachary Taylor took over in 1849, and he also had a very short reign. He celebrated July 4th a few months after he came into office, and it was a horrible time in Washington. The city was swept with a cholera epidemic, and people were warned to be careful of what to drink and not to eat raw food. It was one of the hottest days on record, and he came back to the White House, and he ignored all advice and drank quarts of water, ate a bowl of raw cherries, and consumed some ice milk, and within 2 days he died of constant diarrhea and vomiting. So he had, I mean, these presidents have had a tough time here.
I think so. They need a better dietitian.
Yeah, they did. Now we come to the second greatest drunk whoever occupied the White House was Ulysses S. Grant. Of course, you know he was the Yankee general who led the Yankee soldiers to victory in the Civil War. And but oddly enough, the mere sight of blood caused great nausea in him. He usually vomited if he had to see any blood. And I mean, that's so bizarre, but it was true. He was also a binge drinker. I mean, he started drinking at when he woke up about 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, and he was still drinking at night. But it wasn't Old Devil rum that did him in, but cigars. He virtually had a cigar in his mouth from day, night, whenever. He got up, the first thing he did in the morning, I assume go to the bathroom and then light a cigar. And he died of throat cancer. So,
No kidding.
oh, my God.
Really, but he didn't, but he still drank.
Oh, till the very end, even when he was writing his memoirs.
Wow, that's
Which still
amazing.
are actually today considered the best memoirs of any president ever written. So alcohol must not have affected his brain too much. Anyway, James Garfield had a very brief reign. He was, after a few months in office, he was an assassin shot him in 1881, and a bullet lodged in his back. And believe it or not, he would have survived if it hadn't been for his doctors. God, they were such quacks then. It took 80 days before the doctors killed him. Now, one of his doctors was the famous Alexander Graham Bell.
Really?
And we all know who he was. and but they used instruments that were unclean, and so they infected his body with bacteria. So it wasn't the assassin that caused his death, but his doctors.
This is a very bad day to talk about doctors.
And then now we move quickly to Woodrow Wilson. 1913, he became president, which means he was president during World War II. Now, Wilson is taking a really bad rap these days for being a racist. He was although in school I was taught that he was a great president. In many ways he was, although he has his dark side. He was a strong supporter of the KKK. And
Where was he from? Where was he from?
New Jersey. His first wife, Ellen, died of Bright's disease in 1914, and he was so heartbroken that he attempted suicide in the White House. And there's no known record of any president ever attempting suicide in the White House but Woodrow Wilson. And then in 1915, he married Edith Galt. Now the story gets really interesting. Both of them were opposed to women's suffrage, but the Senate ratified the 19th Amendment in 1920, giving women the right to vote over Wilson's objections. And he valiantly fought for the United States to become a member of the League of Nations, but the Senate rejected it. Now, this stress led to him he had this awful stroke, and the whole left side of his body was paralyzed. But his strong-willed wife, Edith, didn't want the public to know, so she limited access from him. So, in effect, she became a regent, ruling in his name. And now another interesting fact, she was a descendant of the Native American Pocahontas. Now, we hear a lot about Trump talking about Pocahontas because that's his name for Senator Elizabeth Warren, who said she may have some Native American heritage. So Pocahontas has been back in the news again. Now, the irony of this is that Edith Wilson unofficially was our first woman president. And not only that, she was our first Native American president. A lot of people don't know this stuff.
But I have to tell people who they're listening to so they don't think that you're a Martian that just came down, from outer space. This is Darwin Porter. He's the author of many things. If you read Boomer Times, you'll see Donald Trump, the man who would be king. Let's say Donald Trump. Yeah. The man who would be king.
King, yeah.
Yes, and we featured that in our September issue. In October, you're going to see a picture, something that he just wrote about the Obamas, future multimillionaires. But Darwin Porter, of course, is a celebrity writer. He has written about almost every major celebrity, and we just value your being up so early and doing this for us. You're telling me things I had no idea about, and I'm sure our listeners are the same.
They're sort of shocking, really.
Yeah, they are.
Now we come to a sad case of Franklin D. Roosevelt, a man I admired so greatly, and Mrs. Roosevelt, who I got to know and interview in the last 2 years of her life. Now, the world now knows that Mr. Roosevelt, President Roosevelt, was stricken with polio in Campobello, his vacation retreat on an island. And he was confined for a wheelchair for the rest of his life because he was paralyzed. And but he went on and was elected president 4 terms. Now, I want to add that not all of his body was paralyzed because, how shall I say this delicately, he had long-term affairs with his mistresses, Lucy Mercer and Mrs. Lee Hunt. So he wasn't completely paralyzed. Now, here comes the sad part. He decided, as we know, to seek a 4th term in 1944. But his doctors warned him that he had perhaps less than a year to live. But I think he wanted to he really felt he could. He wanted to see the end of the war, which he practically made it just by a few days, and he couldn't relinquish the office. But he selected as his vice president this sort of Pendergast machine guy, Harry S. Truman in Missouri. Why he chose him has never been fully explained. And you would think that knowing that he was going to die, he would have brought Truman into the inner workings of the war. But he didn't even tell him that the United States had developed an atomic bomb. In fact, oddly enough, and I heard this from Truman himself in Key West, Florida in 1959, it was several days before his staff told him that America had invented an atomic bomb. And, of course, Truman had almost no time before he had to make a decision, and he dropped the bomb, as we know, on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which brought the Japanese to their knees and ended World War II.
You know, when you think about all that you're telling us, you know, and you hear the papers today, the stuff on the papers today is nothing compared to what you're telling us here.
Yeah. Well, this is really... Now we come to another tragic figure who didn't follow his doctor's advice. One of the most famous men of all time, Dwight D. Eisenhower. Maybe some late baby boomers didn't know it, but he was the supreme commander who led us to victory in World War II. One of the great men. Of course, it took a great stress on him. I mean, you would think after winning World War II he could have maybe retired, but not him. He went on. He decided to run for president. And he was 62 at the time when he won the office in 1952. But his doctors, again, this evoked what happened to Roosevelt's doctors. His doctors warned him that his heart was so weak that they did not think he could survive the presidency, that he was in danger of imminent stroke. Well, in 1955, he was playing golf on the course in Denver, and he was called to the phone 4 times. They didn't have cell phones in those days, for urgent business involving the fact that Russia might be moving toward West Berlin to take it over. I mean, there were serious problems going on. But he got so mad. Eisenhower was a great man, but he had a horrible temper, and he went into a fit that night that his game was interrupted for 4 times, and he had a stroke. And this was during his first term in office. He had a stroke, but they tried to keep it secret, but word leaked out, and by Monday morning the stock market opened, and it immediately fell $14 billion. Now, $14 billion was worth an incredible money back in 1955.
But Darwin, who was his vice president? I don't remember.
Richard Nixon.
That's right.
Richard
Oh, boy.
Milhouse Nixon. And you would hear about him later, right?
Yeah.
And now, again, under severe warnings that the stress of a second term might kill him, Eisenhower ran for president again and defeated Adlai Stevenson. For the second time, the Democrats nominated Adlai Stevenson. And indeed, first, before he had his next stroke, he didn't tell the public, but he was, technically Nixon could have taken over because he had 2 surgeries. He never revealed what they were, but he had intestinal surgery for some undisclosed thing twice, which means that he was knocked out during the time of the Cold War. Technically, the vice president would come in to take over, but that did not happen.
That's probably why the secrecy, because they didn't want the other nations to know, right?
Exactly. And then in 1957, I remember the Associated Press released a bulletin in 1957. It went around the world. Dwight D. Eisenhower dying, and he really suffered another very bad heart attack. And, of course, Richard Nixon was standing by. But Richard Nixon would have to wait a long time, a decade at least, before he became president. Now, what was not known at the time was that for 6 weeks, Eisenhower could not speak a word. They said he often pounded his fists on the desk in frustration, but then he regained his speech, and he served his term until 1961, until he turned the office over to John F. Kennedy. Oh, we have enough time, I think, I have to say something about John F. Kennedy. No man, practically, who ever became president had as much illness as John F. Kennedy. He suffered all of his life from Addison's disease. He had many other afflictions. He lived almost in constant pain. He was on painkillers, but he talked beautifully, looked wonderful, had a gorgeous wife and incredible children, and he served. Well, you know what happened to him? It wasn't his illness that did him in, although he suffered throughout his life with chlamydia, which is a venereal disease that usually cured by penicillin, but he kept getting reinfected with this venereal disease.
With all his girlfriends, right?
Yes, well, he had, I have a whole book of, he may have had 1,000 seductions. Actually, the Don Juan average is 1,003, so he may have been 3 short of Don Juan, but no one had as many girlfriends as John F. Kennedy. And so he is said to have passed the venereal disease on to several of his women. And as you know, I'm sure you are an expert on these things, it often causes infertility in women who pick up this disease. Oh, my goodness, are we running through?
Yeah, right.
I think I have just enough time. Richard Nixon had 2 or 3 medical problems, but the thing about him that was so frightening, and Henry Kissinger, who was his Secretary of State, has later revealed that, they said Nixon had a very low tolerance of alcohol. And Kissinger, who is still alive, by the way, said Nixon could have 2 or 3 drinks and get sloshed, was his word, sloshed. And at one point, when he was very drunk, 2 emergencies happened. One was, people are talking today about Donald Trump might push the red button and launch another atomic war. But actually, Nixon ordered twice, according to Kissinger, an atomic bomb to be dropped on North Korea after it shot down a U.S. aircraft over international waters. And he also ordered, on a second occasion when he was drunk, the bombing of Damascus after the Palestinian terrorists hijacked a jetliner. And fortunately, his staff was wise enough not to drop the atomic bombs. Huh. So some of the things that we're talking about now have actually almost come to be in American history.
You are an amazing resource. I know we've run out of time, but I have to tell you that I don't know, maybe that's your next book.
No, it isn't.
No, I know your next books. I know.
I am bowing out. Well, of course, I'm always fascinated by presidents, and even more so by first ladies. You know, my book on. By the way, the Chinese have voted by their number that Hillary may be president because they're publishing 4 times more of my Hillary book than of my book on Trump. So I think they're voting for Hillary.
I see.
Donald threatens it. So we're out of time.
Yeah,
right?
We're out of time. But this has been just amazing, and I can't wait to hear about your next book on Lana Turner. But thank you, Darwin. Everybody's sitting, I'm sure, listening with their mouths open as I did. Thank you so much.
So now you know that George Washington was a gigolo.
No, I know a lot more. We didn't even get to the next ones. Maybe that's the next show to talk about, all these other ones, right?
Oh, my. Okay. It sounds like you've got a wonderful show.
Yeah.
Happy October.
Thank you. You too.
Return of fall.
All right. Bye.